How's it going, folks? Welcome back to some Pokemon Unite content here on the channel. I finally, after playing what would probably be considered an unhealthy amount of Pokemon Unite, cracked into Masters, playing with one of the groups of 5 folks, my wife plus 3 wonderful subs from the Glandia Discord that we've been jamming with in the evenings as a 5-stack. And I've just been having a blast playing the game overall. Before I break into what I want to talk about in this video at its core, I just really want to emphasize that I've been loving this game. I've been playing it a ton, and the feedback I'm about to give is focused on wanting the game to improve and be better than it can be, as opposed to wanting to drag it down. So now to the meat of the video. Today I want to talk about some things that I think are potential balance issues that I've noticed as I ranked up higher in Pokemon Unite. Some context to my rank up. A majority of my climb to Masters has been done playing with 5-player teams. And the 5-player team dynamic is very different than the solo queue dynamic based on the small amount of solo queue that I've done personally and the bunch of solo queue I've watched other people doing. I think at the core, a number of the balance issues I'm going to talk about aren't nearly as prevalent in the solo queue, because some of the issues stem from the fact that these Pokemon are very good when coordinated well together, and it's very difficult to get strong coordination together in the solo queue. While it does happen on occasion, I think it's the exception there as opposed to the rule, whereas in the 5-stacks, the coordination is happening regularly, which means Pokemon that are overtuned really shine out more because they're being maximized in their roles as opposed to being disorganized in the solo queue. So to start with, I would like to start by saying I think there's only one Pokemon in the game currently that I would like to see a nerf to, and that is this large gentleman here. So I think Snorlax, even though it says Role Defender there, he's an all-rounder in my mind with his current setup, and it's not just because he's a round thick man. He just does everything. He hits for an okay amount of damage. He has an incredible amount of mobility thanks to the jump on both tackle and heavy slam. He CCs, crowd controls, better than any other Pokemon in the game between heavy slams and barriers and yawns. At no point in the game is Snorlax weak. In the early game, thanks to tackle, it's good at picking off opposing food and Pokemon. And then as you scale up into the mid to late game, the barrier, when used correctly, is probably the best control thing in the game. If you're good, you can stun multiple people into walls with it. Generally speaking, you'll stun at least one. And when that barrier goes up, if that Snorlax player is good, they effectively lock out a melee character or two for a long enough duration that they're going to get melted by if there's even one other DPS with the Snorlax. So while Snorlax, I think, just does a little bit of everything a little bit too well, it is the only Pokemon that I think I would nerf in the game. I think a lot of the other Pokemon that are super common, for example, Greninja, I think was probably 75+% of the junglers I played played against in my last Trek to Ultra, and it was the character that I ultimately ended up playing as a jungler for my team in the last couple of runs that I did, because I think Greninja is just stand out the best jungle character in a post Cinderace nerf world. And the ranged junglers that have a very powerful auto attack are just the best at being over leveled because they can snipe people from afar. And then, Greninja, similar to Cinderace's Feint, has that smoke screen to allow it to get out if it's in any kind of hairy situations. Past Greninja, typically we saw Lucario on most opposing teams as well in high level masters. It's just a very good melee DPS that has a lot of mobility and notably doesn't need to be in the jungle to be good. So Lucario is probably similar to Snorlax, is probably one of the best early game bullies in terms of pressuring your opponent's food. So Lucario can help your lane get ahead early if executed properly. And then in the mid to late game, Lucario's power up punch and the bone shard or bone club or whatever it's called really allow Lucario to jump into your opponent's backline and kill their ranged nukers like Ninetales or Venusaur or Greninja, even if the Greninja is not careful, while their crowd control is up front. I think at the core, I would really just like to see a number of buffs to a lot of the Pokemon in the game. Looking at the actual Pokemon that are seeing play at the top end, I think honestly they should probably just take some number of attacks on every in stat numbers, and just make some of these other things better to make them more competitive in the early to mid game. One of the things that's really stood out in my mind, while the compositions vary a little bit from team to team, the Pokemon that feel like they're a little bit too pushed right now are the Pokemon that are explicitly the good early games. Getting ahead in your lane early with Pokemon like Snorlax, Lucario, Cramorant, Wigglytuff, Ninetales, all of these Pokemon that evolve by level 4 or don't evolve at all, they're so good at pressuring in the early lane and stealing that food. And then the fact that some of these Pokemon fall off in the very late game doesn't matter because you got ahead on your lane early, and then you got ahead on the Dreadnought because you were ahead on your lane. And then a lot of these 3-stage Pokemon that take longer to really get going, things like, Venusaur and Gardevoir and Garchomp, while these Pokemon are very powerful if they stay on par with the opposing team, level 10 Garchomp versus level 10 Lucario, I'll take the Garchomp all day. But in reality, how that plays out, you're almost never a level 10 Garchomp when they have a level 10 Lucario. Your Gibble and even your Gabite to a degree are just so weak in the early game that by the time you're Garchomp, their Lucario is probably 12 or even 13 because your team was behind, unable to get those Dreadnoughts, unable to score points and push points to gain experience from doing those things. And I just feel like the dynamic of these 3-stage Pokemon versus the early game Pokemon is just not in a good spot overall. I don't know exactly what's the best direction to balance it in, but I think something needs to be done there. A very common theme among the teams that were the most difficult to play against, and even our own teams when we were building our own compositions, we essentially always had 3 to 4 good early game Pokemon, and the hardest teams to play against were the ones that had their jungler plus 3 to 4 good early game Pokemon. So some type of balance I think needs to be struck there between maybe they need to make the payoff in the late game even better, so that way when you're under leveled you can come back up from behind. But like I said, there's a couple different dynamics they could tune and twist to do that, but I feel like the current balance that they have now is a little bit off, and that probably needs some adjustment. Now, past just that, I think this is a comment on kind of Pokemon across the board, and I'm hopeful that they'll honestly do some of these things that I'm suggesting based on the first balance patch. It seems like they're kind of attentive and noticing some of the same things I am, is that if you watch the really good players play a lot of these Pokemon, like Lucario, for example, all of the good Lucario players are taking Power Up Punch and they're taking Bone Club. They never touch Extreme Speed. They never touch Close Combat because those moves just aren't good enough. And I really hope, even on the Pokemon that are good already, I hope they massage the weaker moves in those kits so we can get to a point where there's compositions where you want Extreme Speed on Lucario. Maybe you want Flail over Heavy Slam on a Snorlax. Even though those Pokemon are good, it would be nice to see diversity in how their builds end up playing out in the the real world. Maybe you want Extreme Speed against this composition, but you want Power Up Punch against this other one. So there should just be decisions to make there, as opposed to, no, this is strictly optimal. Speaking of decisions to make, one other thing, and I think this thing's a little bit less important, but from a diversity of play pattern standpoint and a general health of the game, I think it would be good if it changed a little bit. Most of the items I feel like probably could stand to have some adjustments, both held items as well as the activated items, especially. You look at the average team in, even Veteran Plus, and probably even the lower leagues in that, the escape button is just so much better than all of the other items by a lot. And I don't think escape button needs to be nerfed so much as, again, I think it would be great to see maybe reduce the cooldowns and all these other items that are close, something to make it more appealing to, take potion, take full heal, take X speed, take X attack, instead of just being like, no, you're probably just wrong if you're not playing escape button. Similarly, for the held items, I think, well, obviously I don't know the exact held items that the opposing team is playing. Anybody that's gotten to a team fight at the end of a battle, knows that most of the opposing Pokemon, and probably a lot of people on your team too, they all have Buddy Barrier, right? And I think Buddy Barrier is something that I've honestly just been playing it on actual everything, getting plus 80% health, basically plus 40% on 2 people. in your team fights is just so invaluable. And I don't even know that I necessarily would like a Buddy Barrier nerf so much as I think it would just be nice to see some of these other items be made a bit better. So it's more appealing. So it's not just like, well, I effectively have 2 item slots because everybody gets Buddy Barrier. And again, that would be nice to see that, like, okay, this is a contextual thing that I want to be able to do this sometimes, but I don't always want to be doing it. So, what do you think? Looks like I've rambled for about 10 minutes now. Do you agree with my takes here? Do you think I'm off base on anything? Are there specific buffs you would like to see? Do you think more than just Snorlax is a little bit too good right now? I think another thing to consider too, just to close on, is that remember this game's still very new and there's not a lot of Pokemon in it. And there's a very reasonable chance that as opposed to nerfing something like Snorlax, Blastoise is one that's been data mined and it was in the closed beta, so we know it's coming. Perhaps Blastoise as another defender Pokemon fills the same role as Snorlax, and we get diversity in the game in those roles just as we get more Pokemon added to it, because it's definitely a very real possibility. That being said, I do definitely think there are a number of Pokemon, like my boy Garchomp. I love playing him when I was starting the game out, but he just falls off so hard. There's a number of Pokemon in the game right now that just they've kind of been done dirty, and they could definitely use some kind of power up of some sort. And I hope we see that kind of try to pull them up towards competitive as opposed to bringing all the things the top down. I think making weaker things better definitely feels better from a player perspective too, as opposed to making things that are probably a little bit overtuned worse. Just like scale it up instead of bringing it down. All right. At any rate, we've now rambled for almost 12 minutes. So thanks for listening. Let me know in the comment section down below if you agree with my takes here, if you disagree. And I'll be back tomorrow with another Pokemon Unite gameplay video. So if you want to see some of my 5 stacks of my Climb 2 Masters in action, be sure to stop by and check those out. Peace, folks.